You are watching the press preview, a first look at what's on the front pages as they arrive. It's time to see what's making the headlines with broadcaster and commentator Andreou and the political editor of the Scottish Sun, Rachel Watson. They'll be with us from now until just before midnight. So let's have a look at some of those papers for you now. Well, the Eye carries the warning from a UN chief that the world has entered an era of global boiling. The Financial Times says the chief executive of Coutts is the latest finance head to roll over Nigel Farage's bank account furore. The Guardian headline, £1 billion hit for NatWest as Coutts boss is ousted. That's also the lead story for the Metro. The Times reports that migrants are to be housed in marquees over the summer. The Mail leads on the High Court ruling that the Duke of Sussex's claim over allegations of unlawful information gathering against the publisher of The Sun will go to a trial, but not his claim relating to phone hacking. And a reminder that by scanning the QR code you'll see on screen during the programme, you can check out the front pages of tomorrow's newspapers while you watch us. And tonight we are joined by the broadcaster and commentator Andreou and the political editor of the Scottish Sun, Rachel Watson. Welcome to both of you. Let's start with the Metro and the headline there, looking at global boiling. This is now the phase we're told that we've moved on from global warming, and we are actually global boiling now. Alex, take us into this story.
So this is the head of the UN for climate warning that the era of global warming has ended and we're now in global boiling. And this is to do with two findings. The first, that we have experienced the warmest year as a globe on record. And the second is the really worrying increase of temperatures within the oceans, which are causing all sorts of problems. And we had Biden in America come out and make a sort of extraordinary statement about the weather events there and introduce new regulations for people who have to work outside in this sort of weather. I know that I'm Greek, and I know that back in my home country, we are experiencing just immensely difficult circumstances with fires everywhere. All construction work has been cancelled. And I think what is not mentioned enough is the economic impact of these weather phenomena. You know, basically, offices have been told to close early. Construction work has all but stopped. There's fires which are affecting a huge amount of businesses in the tourism industry. What's the economic impact of that? And so reaching net zero, taking the measures necessary to slow this down and eventually stop it, becomes an economic necessity as well as everything else.
And Rachel, what did you make in detail of what the UN chief, Antonio Guterres, had to say? Were you shocked by his pronouncements today?
I think they're really stark comments from him. You know, you brought up some of the language he used around that this is no longer about global warming, it's about global boiling, and I think that's such a stark comment. But a lot of it is, you know, we have been hearing for years about the concerns whether we'll be able to meet the Paris Agreement, for example, on limiting global warming to 1.5 degrees. I was at COP26 where these discussions were ongoing in Glasgow. You know, it's not new that there are concerns about this, but I think the real fear now, because it's so obvious to everybody about the impacts of global warming and climate change. I mean, you look at the images that Alex just brought up from Greece and across Europe. We saw in North America and Canada earlier this year, the extreme weathers that they were having. And I think, you know, this falls on government. Things have to happen at a quicker pace than they have been. And it's about repetitive failures. And Alex brings up the economy there. And it is, you know, it will this has a huge impact on the economy. And, we look in Scotland, for example, and there are fears over the North Sea industry and the changes. And we hear about a just transition so often from the UK government, from the Scottish government, from the Labour Party, but nobody set out what a just transition actually looks like from them. And I think it's so important that governments who failed to do this in the past need to be doing it at a much quicker pace than they are at the moment. And I think these images and the comments from President Biden and from Antonio Guterres today really set out, the challenges that are being faced and the fact that we do need to quicken this pace.
And yet, Alex, we do have those saying that this is nothing different that we're experiencing, that every year in Greece, you mentioned your home country, that there are fires every year, and actually we're being too catastrophic in our pronouncements about what is actually happening. What would you say to that?
I mean, it's simply not true. Of course, these things happen all the time. But if you look around right now, there are extreme weather phenomena happening everywhere, and they start earlier and they finish later. And so, we're not saying that what's happening is unprecedented. We're just saying that the frequency with which it happens is getting much, much more worrying. And that is undeniable. All you have to do is look around. Look at the weather here. Look at the weather in Australia, where it's meant to be winter. Look at the rate at which the polar ice caps are melting. You really couldn't have clearer signs that this needs addressing. Your own Ed Conway actually wrote an incredibly smart piece in the Times today saying net zero goals need more carrot and less stick. And I think that is the key. We have to address people's self-interest as well as their concern for humanity and the planet. We have to say, what is the economic cost of not doing something? How much life could be better by doing something? There was polling about 6 months ago on our dependence on Russian fuel. And people were asked if renewables helped with making us less energy dependent on Russia, would you support them? And the percentage by which people said yes was astronomical. It was in the 90s. And so there are ways of framing the debate, I think, that appeals both to our sense of selflessness, but also to our sense of selfishness. And we have to balance those two.
Rachel, despite the UN Secretary-General's dire warnings, there was still a positive note in that he says it's still possible to limit damage with action.
Yeah, there was there. And I think that is, going back to what Alex has been talking about there with changes. And it's about how the government takes people with them. I mentioned the North Sea oil and gas industry in Scotland, for example. And people really want to see, we know that the burning of fossil fuels and the use of them cannot continue at the pace that it has previously. We know there needs to be a transition. But it requires governments to move quickly, but also to move quickly and take people with them. And I think when we look back, that hasn't been done quick enough. And we're still not really seeing the answers from governments that we need, these plans on how they will not only, try and limit global warming, to try and tackle climate change, to do as much as possible to make that movement to renewables, but how to take people with them. And I think this is going to be, we're going to a general election next year, and it's going to be a huge issue, not just in the UK, but around the world as countries try and make that shift. And I think, this is a desperate situation, and these images really do highlight that. And, hopefully that they will show people that, the time to act really is now.
Staying with the environment, let's take a look at the Mirror front page, and very worrying photo that takes over most of the page, Alex. And this story is about the clothes that are donated to West Africa, the consequences. They're ending up on the beaches because they're such poor quality, they can't actually be used and they're being dumped. Oh, Alex, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Sorry, was that to me?
Yes, sorry.
I'm terribly sorry, yes. I mean, we all have experience of that, right? We have all bought something that seemed a little too cheap to be true, and ended up with it falling apart after 2 times of wearing it, you know, shoes that become unstuck very, very quickly. And I think people are becoming more aware, actually, that paying a little bit more for something durable is not only the more environmentally friendly thing to do, but it's also the smarter thing to do. The problem is, and I say this as someone who did at some point in the past experience extreme poverty, that you know very good shoes will last you for years, but you may not have that £100 or £150 outlay to buy those expensive shoes in one go. And so what happens is that you end up paying much more for your shoes over that period by buying pairs for a tenner that fall apart after a month. But at that point, you have another tenner to buy a pair. And so that is, I think, another aspect of it we have to address. Fast fashion is also addressing a need in society from people who don't have enough money to afford high-quality goods.
And Rachel, what is the consequence of this story? What are we being told? That we shouldn't give clothes, we shouldn't donate clothes to other countries if they're of poor quality?
I mean, I think that the real kind of behind the story here is the fact that this is a warning about fast fashion, and we see this, you know, this comes up time and time again, and I think it's right to highlight what happens to these clothes sometimes, to show people the kind of difference that it can be made by not going for those, you know, every fashion trend. And it's difficult because you have things, you know, Alex talks about rightly that people who can't afford to pay £100 on shoes, or they can't afford more expensive clothing, even though it might be over the longer period, it might be cheaper to do so. That's not an option for some people. But also there is this, you know, having to move with the fashion trends, particularly for young people who are maybe influenced by social media, for example, and they can go on websites and they can buy clothes and then they're not the best quality, and they do, you know, they go out of fashion very quickly, they are they fall apart, they don't last very long. And I think, you know, it's all about just another one of these stories just to make people think, and if they have options, to maybe use the options that would be a more sustainable choice, which, you know, as we've said, it isn't an option for everyone, unfortunately, but for those that it is, you know, can you make that more sustainable choice?
Yes. Let's have, we've just got time to look at the FT front page and this story, Alex, excuse me, about the resignation of Peter Flavel, the Coutts chief executive. Do you believe that he had to go?
Look, with this story, several things can be true at once, right? The bank botched several aspects of how it ended its relationship with Nigel Farage. There is no hiding from that, nor should we try to. The two most senior people have now carried the can. That should be the end of it. But there are other things that are also true, right? It is also true that had you or I had this exact problem with our bank, the Prime Minister and the Chancellor wouldn't be getting involved. And it's also true that the unforgivable sin of Coutts in this particular case is which side it chose. That's why there are large sections of the press that are going after them. If Coutts had closed the account of the head of Just Stop Oil, for instance, because they said he did something that was contrary to their values, all the same would newspapers now rending their garments would be applauding them. And we know that.
Rachel, your thoughts? We've got about 40 seconds.
I think, you know, there are questions and issues that have been raised in this, but, you know, I think it's one of these stories that have run and run in the press, and actually the public interest is, you know, has peaked and is over in this. I don't think it's been one of these stories that's really grabbed the public in the way that headlines on issues such as their mortgage rates. There are other issues that people are incredibly concerned about at the moment, and I think they would rather be reading and hearing from the UK government and other governments on.
Rachel, thank you. Alex was laughing there at you saying the public interest had peaked. I think that was laughing in agreement.
Well, yes, because the contrast between the two stories we just covered couldn't be starker.
Indeed.